It's Thursday, February 5th, 2026. Welcome to Make It Make Sense. I'm Grant Herms. Today in the show, something a little bit different from our normal Thursday episodes. I know that there's a lot going on, but I had two great interviews this week, and I didn't want to hold on to one of them for next Friday. Given the news cycle we are in and how fast things have been moving, I just didn't want one of them to get old because I think that they're both so good. So the one you're going to get today is all about DHS and ICE from somebody who was actually inside both of those agencies. My guest today is Scott Shuchart. He used to be the Assistant Director for Regulatory Affairs and Policy at ICE, and before that, during both the Obama and Trump administration the first time around, he was at DHS as a Senior Advisor for Civil Rights, and he's got a lot of thoughts about what we've been seeing on the ground from ICE, particularly in Minneapolis, but all over the country, how ICE is operating, how their detention centers are operating, and what needs to happen to ICE after this is all over. And what he thinks about that, I think you're going to find really interesting. But before we get to the conversation, make sure you're following or subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcast. Leave a review or a comment. It really helps boost the show on those platforms. Sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack, where today, if you're a free subscriber, you get access to what normally would be weekly original reporting for paid subscribers because it's an exclusive for Make It Make Sense. I was able to find some previously unreported on remarks by the Attorney General for Civil Rights, or the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, I should say, Harmeet Dillon, who said something that seems to cut directly against what her office has been doing, what the president has been calling for, and what congressional Republicans are trying to push through in Congress right now when it comes to how states run their elections. But you can only get access to that article for free right now if you subscribe to the Substack. And as always, share the show on social media. It's Mims News Pod. That's MIMS News Pod, all one word on every platform. I am at Grant Herms on Twitter and Blue Sky, and at Grant_Herms on everything else. All right, let's get to my conversation with Scott Shuchart. Does coffee make you anxious, sweaty, unfocused, or maybe your doctor thinks you have a crippling caffeine addiction, which I am definitely not in any way referencing for my personal life? Let me turn you on to Mantra Matcha. Mantra Matcha is ceremonial-grade matcha from a private hillside in Uji, Japan. Smooth, naturally sweet, and it gives you this calm, focused energy without the jitters. It's packed with antioxidants like more than 130 times more than regular green tea, so you feel energized and you feel good. Now, the matcha flavor isn't for everybody, but good news, Mantra has 6 infused flavors like banana cacao, strawberry lemon, cinnamon goji berry, and rosehip dragon fruit, which sounds like a name from Game of Thrones, but it's delicious. Plus, every box you buy helps provide a meal to a child through the No Kid Hungry program, which we love. Now, right now, listeners to Make It Make Sense can go to mantramatcha.com and use the code MIMS25 for 15% off. Now, that code also supports Make It Make Sense with a commission. That's how these things work. I got to legally tell you. But the good news is you'll help the show, you'll stay caffeinated, and maybe not too much. Again, that code at mantramatcha.com is MIMS25 for 15% off. Mantra Matcha, less chaos, more clarity, 2 things we could all use a little bit of right now. All right, let's get on with the show. Well, Scott, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, great to be here.
Before we roll into what we're talking about, talk to me about your background and relationship to DHS and ICE, both when you were there and then what it's become since you left.
Right. So I've been a lawyer for about 25 years. I spent about half that time at DHS in 2 different periods, 2 different jobs. Mm-hmm. So from 2010 to 2018, I was a civil servant, career employee in the Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, which is an oversight office that exists, or I should say used to exist. Trump fired all 200 people who worked there, or 199 of them. But it used to be an office that provided civil rights and civil liberties advice, oversight, took in public complaints, and evaluated those complaints. And then I left in 2018, sort of over the Trump family separation policy, over my inability to really do anything about it when I thought that was my job in that role. And then I came back in 2022 as part of the Biden administration working at ICE. And that time I was a political appointee. So when the Biden administration ended in January, I left.
Sure. Let's start with the family separation stuff, because we saw Greg Bovino move out of his position in Minneapolis, and then you get Tom Homan to run this thing in ICE? And not that he hasn't been in the background the entire time for this administration, but what were your dealings like with him in the first go round for Donald Trump?
With Homan.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the first thing I would say is changing out who's in front of the TV cameras every day is very different from changing out the policy. Tom
Mhm.
Homan has been closely involved in all of this since January 20th, and the fact that Bovino was the star of the show for a couple of months doesn't really change that. I think what's really going on is this sort of drama between, like, Homan's aligned with Stephen Miller and Bovino was aligned with the Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, and her special advisor, boyfriend, whatever he is, Corey Lewandowski.
Right.
But Tom Homan is somebody who at least used to know what to say to get along with everybody. Tom Homan during I really have to go back to the Obama administration when Tom Homan was running enforcement removal operations within ICE, was somebody who the Obama officials, I wasn't an Obama appointee, but it was somebody the Obama officials could really do business with. Somebody who was very warm with a lot of the people who worked for Secretary Johnson, Secretary Napolitano. I think everyone understood that he believed in enforcement, but in the 2010 to 2016 period, it seemed like he believed in enforcement within the law and was
Mhm.
interested in making sure that there was law and policy and resources to support that. Subsequently, obviously, he has become uh, someone who's closely aligned with Geo, which is one of the big private prison companies. You may remember he took a $50,000 bribe from the FBI that he doesn't seem to have paid back in a sandwich bag. That
On
was
camera? On
on
camera? Yeah.
camera. Or I've only heard the audio tape. Is there definitely video?
Yeah, from
Um,
the reporting, I understand that it's on
okay.
video.
So that sting wasn't just about him selling bad license plates or something. That was about him trying to sell influence
Right.
with the private prison companies. And so clearly he is both playing both sides with respect to the financing of the expansion of ICE detention and also has come out as a real true believer in the MAGA agenda rather than somebody who believes in immigration enforcement within the law. That's my take on it.
So then, as someone who worked at the civil rights division of DHS in this way, is his position there just as concerning as someone like Greg Bovino in terms of policy? I mean, I know that the policy doesn't shift as much as you said. So, what are your feelings right now about the civil rights implications of Homan taking over?
Well, I will say this, and Homan, as I understand it, even though he actually has an office at ICE, he's a White House employee.
Yeah.
He is somebody who is coming in from the top with the president's authority in a way. Bovino was really a regional sector leader from CBP, from Border Patrol,
Mhm.
who was being puffed up to this very dramatic field leadership position. And so the symbolism of Homan coming in is a little bit the grown-ups being in charge. And I think the practicalities of Homan coming in are more of trying to have more of, maybe not fully, but more of the traditional ICE way of doing things, which is not parading through the streets and grabbing everybody brown they can find, but
Mhm.
rather doing something that's more investigative. ICE has fugitive operations teams where they figure out who's worth going after, put together an operation, and get that person. Now they have more money, they have more people, they can do that at a larger scale, and they have more detention beds to put arrestees in. But I think what Homan is talking about doing, if he reduces the boots on the ground from 3,000 to 2,000, is about doing more targeted operations. That's what he says he's going to do. I don't find him a very trustworthy person, but if that's what he's going to do, then that's what it means substantively, is a shift more towards the way ICE has traditionally done things in a target-centered approach rather than a just clear the field, grab as many grandmas as you can type approach.
Yeah, let's talk about that approach because that was the first time I ever, talked to you. It was about this approach that ICE has had in Minneapolis, in Chicago, in Los Angeles, going back to last summer.
Mm.
And then we can talk about some of the training problems we are seeing here. But I have to believe that when you were at ICE, uh, in your position, this is not how ICE operates or was really designed to operate.
That's right. ICE has traditionally, well, I mean, headcount's a big issue. ICE has traditionally had about 10,000 people doing what's called enforcement and removal operations,
Mhm.
which is what everybody thinks of when they think about ICE. And then there's another 10,000 people in Homeland Security Investigations,
Mhm.
HSI. which is more of an FBI type thing. For one thing, ERO doesn't require a college degree. They don't wear suits and ties. They're doing things out on the street. HSI, like FBI, college degrees, law degrees, accounting degrees. They wear a suit and tie. They're doing more of a detective type work. Well, under the Trump administration, a lot of those HSI people have been tasked over to do the work of ERO. But traditionally, what ERO is about doing is finding people who are removable, deportable, managing their cases, putting them in detention, managing the detention contracts, and putting them on planes. Well, what's changed is it was so much more money and they're hiring more people. The detention capacity has already grown from about 30,000 to 70,000 beds. And the number of seats that they have on planes has also grown through different contracting vehicles, through using military flights, through sending people to Guantanamo Bay, and all of that kind of stuff. So it is a higher throughput version of the same business. And what we understand is under Stephen Miller, they're under a quota system. They're not making it, but their aspiration is to be doing 3,000 arrests a day. And it's a pipeline. If you put 3,000 people in the front end of the pipe, the only way that's going to work is if you're removing 3,000 people a day from the back and you have the detention capacity buffering in the middle. So while they haven't fully ramped up to that, that is the direction that they're trying to go, right? 1 million arrests, 1 million removals every year. And that is at least 3 times what had been achieved in any previous year.
Yeah. These civil rights implications of that, obviously we are seeing them, but what are the issues with just the policies of that? Like I said, obviously we're seeing those things on the ground. You've got detention centers that are full of people who are being mistreated, but what are the worries you have?
Yeah. One of the things that's come out in the last couple of weeks is that ICE and the Department of Homeland Security that ICE sits under have adopted extremely aggressive, which is a lawyer's way of saying wrong, interpretations of their authority to arrest people without a warrant.
Yeah.
So what a lot of people don't understand is being deportable isn't a crime. It's a civil offense, like not paying your taxes on time.
Mm-hmm.
And it is punishable through detention and deportation. But you're not being punished through detention, but the consequences is detention and deportation. But it's not a crime. And so traditionally, ICE has had an ability to do what's called an administrative warrant, which is just a piece of paper that you print out of the computer and have a supervisor sign that allows them to take people into civil custody for removal. And that kind of a warrant can only be served in a public area. It doesn't allow them to break down your door and come into your house to arrest you. To break down your door and come into your house to arrest you requires an arrest warrant signed by a judge. And that is, what you would get from a criminal warrant. And ICE has now apparently reinterpreted its authority to allow it to break down your door and arrest you in your bed at 4 a.m. if you already have a final deportation order that was signed off on at some point in the past. Could have been in absentia, meaning you weren't even there at court. Could have been 10 years ago. They've now decided that so long as someone ever decided you were deportable, and you might have lots of legal ways to contest that now, but if someone ever at some point decided you were deportable and you haven't been deported, then ICE can break down your door and arrest you then. That is a radical new understanding of their authority. There was another story about a week after that ICE has also greatly expanded its understanding of what can arrest you in public without even having that administrative warrant, without even having a piece of paper. They are then putting people in detention. They have reinterpreted the authority over when someone is in mandatory detention, meaning ICE would have no discretion to release them on bond, basically, like having a bail system.
Mm-hmm.
They have now interpreted the authority so that almost everyone is mandatory. So once you're arrested, they've now interpreted their authority to say they can't let you go. And it's not that they can't let you go, but they can't let you go through the traditional authority that allows for bond. And so in all of those ways, they're making it a system that operates more punitively, more chaotically, that has less independent oversight of the people who are doing the arresting and the detaining and the deporting, and pushing that authority more down to the field, giving individual officers much more freedom to act. And then the other thing I'll say from a civil rights oversight perspective, I mentioned this a little earlier, the Trump administration back in April fired everyone who worked at the Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties and everyone who worked at the Office for Detention Oversight or the detention oversight ombudsman. And so there is vastly less oversight happening, which is to say, people who do not work directly on detention aren't getting the same visibility. And another thing that you've seen, Congress for several years has given itself the right to go visit an ICE facility
Yeah.
on no notice, right? They can just show up and show their
Right.
congressional credential and see it. And that is kind of valuable because with warning, any detention facility will clean up its act a little bit. Well, ICE is now fighting that in court and saying that because they have separate money from the One Big Beautiful Bill Act last summer, that that money is exempt from the requirement that they allow Congress in on no notice. And so, in
Right.
all of those ways, they're trying to shield what they're doing from oversight and review.
Yeah. And that money at the time, they said, well, what we can do is keep these in separate accounts and we won't cross these funding streams, but it's pretty much impossible to keep track of that money. I'm pretty sure Kristi Noem is also trying to say that they need like a week's notice, I think. Is that what she said?
That's the policy they've tried to put in, as I understand it. Yeah.
Yeah. You said something a little earlier, and I want you to walk through this because it's a question that I know a lot of people have. I'm from Minnesota originally. I've got folks who live just south of Minneapolis. My mom is frequently right across from the Whipple Center, the detention center
Mm-hmm.
there. And I was talking to her recently about how ICE agents are allowed to break car windows and reach into vehicles and how that works with even administrative warrants. Because those administrative warrants will often come from immigration judges, which are not the same thing as the judges we would assume or think of when we think of regular warrants, right?
Well, this is actually a technical point. The warrants don't come from immigration judges. The warrants come from ICE officers. The deportation order that the warrant is based on would come from an immigration judge.
So then the administrative warrant is just them signing their own permission slip,
Yes,
basically.
exactly that.
How does that work? How does that not actually violate several rights to privacy or any of those things?
Well, the statute has provided for arrest on administrative warrant for many decades, and the
Yeah.
courts have generally said that on a civil charge, like being out of status, that it satisfies constitutional requirements because traditionally there are then various forms of review. So under the statute, this is a Congress changed this system a lot in the Clinton administration when the Republicans came in 1990. For they brought in a lot of harsh immigration restrictions that Bill Clinton signed in the run up to the 1996 election. And that is unfortunately the kind of broken immigration law we're still living with. But under that law, ICE is allowed to do these arrests on administrative warrants, which they then are supposed to evaluate for release on bond. And if you're not satisfied, and the conditions for being released are unless you are a public safety risk or a flight risk, which is to say you're going to disappear and not show up for your hearings, they're supposed to let you out on conditions of supervision, which could be that you wear an ankle monitor, that you check in every week, or that you post a bond. And if you don't like how that works out for you, you're supposed to be able to go to an immigration judge within 10 days for review of those conditions of release. Now, that is the piece that the administration has decided to tear up and to say, actually, anybody who has a final order isn't being arrested under that piece of the statute. They're being arrested under a different law called expedited removal, which then means mandatory detention. And so what you're seeing here, I think, is kind of the collision between a piece of a system that was designed to allow ICE to work quickly on the front end and then have some review within ICE, within the immigration courts, within the immigration judges, and the Trump administration's desire to take as many shortcuts through that system as they can. And so they want to hold on to the administrative warrants piece, maybe use it even more aggressively, but then take away the due process that was supposed to go along with that.
I want to move on to the actions of ICE agents here because
Yeah,
in your work with policy at ICE, I know you weren't involved directly in the training, but I've asked you about this before. We have seen a number of instances of ICE agents using not just threats, but actual fear as a tactic to coerce
right.
members of communities that they're in to do what they want, whether it's invoking Renee Good's name, which is something that I wrote about on the Substack. And then also we've got some new reporting this week out of Colorado that ICE agents in Aurora were leaving what are supposed to be like death cards, Ace of Spades cards in cars. That goes back to the Vietnam War when soldiers would leave them in the mouths of North Vietnamese soldiers, uh, based on I think a pretty unfounded racist superstition about Vietnamese people and the Ace of Spades or whatever. But nonetheless, those ICE agents are using that thing as death cards.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's unconscionable. I mean, how do you understand how those things are being allowed in the current operating way that ICE is behaving right now?
There appears to be a lot of deference to the field and very little desire to impose policy from the top down. And so it's interesting because Border Patrol is much bigger than ICE, or than ICE was before it got this infusion of money last summer. Many more people, um, and often has felt even more than ICE as though all authority had been devolved to the sector chiefs, people like Greg Bovino, who are in charge of
Right.
one area that's maybe a couple of states or a part of a state. But even Border Patrol, CBP, the agency it's a part of, has a policy on when they can wear masks. ICE, here we are, 8 months, 9 months, 10 months into this controversy about them wearing masks. It's not just they don't have a policy against it, they don't have a policy for it. The way they approach it is just the guys want to wear masks, let's stand behind them. And I think similarly, whether it's wearing Punisher gear or Sicario masks or whatever it is, the higher ups at ICE have just decided that they are not going to do anything that could be interpreted by their people as tying anybody's hands. I think the metaphor that we heard when we worked there at the Biden administration about what it had been like in Trump 1 and what people want to hear is that the gloves are off, their wrists are untied, they can do the job or do the mission either the way they've always wanted to do it or however they want to do it. And I think it's really pretty gross that the way they apparently want to do it is as anti-heroes, right?
Yeah.
Like the Punisher is not a good guy. He
No.
also doesn't like the police.
Right.
And the fact that they take characters like that as like visual role models, and then, as you say, there's a lot of stuff that kind of comes out of white nationalist movements that sort of comes to the Reconstruction era Klan in some of the symbolism of what they're doing. It's really pretty gross. I have to say, having met many officers and agents during the time that I worked there, it is certainly not universal that this is how people carry themselves. It is
Sure.
certainly not the case that every ICE officer is a white nationalist. There are a lot of non-white people who work for ICE in law enforcement roles, who I'm sure are not walking around with Aryan Brotherhood tattoos, right?
Right.
It does seem a little bit like the bad eggs are stinking up the joint too.
I also think too that it is some of the rapid expansion of ICE, and we can talk about the training a little bit, but the way that DHS has been promoting some of those white nationalist things. I mean, they're using white nationalist slogans, referencing deep cut
Yes.
white nationalist phrases and writings, and allowing ICE agents to have patches that have not so cryptic Nordic white nationalists. Those things. I understand intellectually the idea of letting agents operate on the ground a little more unfettered. I struggle with the idea that then means that untying their hands means a lack of accountability. I think most people, when you talk to them, most voters want probably a little bit more aggressive immigration enforcement, but they want it targeted. They don't want this kind of a thing, and they want to be able to see the faces of the people who are in their communities.
Yeah.
So, how do you, I guess, circle that square a little bit?
Yeah, I think that is the right question. I think from what I've seen of the polling data and just what I understand of the politics, excuse me, people want a secure border. People want respect for the law. People do not want law abiding grandmothers deported in
Right.
mass, even when they're technically deportable, right? And it's navigating the line between all those points that that has tied the system up really ever since it was really the 2008 recession
Hmm.
when the labor market collapsed, when we stopped having the same sort of back and forth of mostly, male Mexican folks who were coming in and out of the construction workforce. And we ended up with this system where it was a lot more complete families being in the United States out of status, that we've had this dynamic with also the large number of childhood arrivals, people who were at one point protected by DACA, though increasingly not. Nobody quite knows how to navigate the desire that we have a secure border and that we have respect for the law internally, with the fact that through failures going back to the Reagan administration, we have a large number of long settled undocumented people, right?
Hmm.
Most people who are here who are undocumented have been that way since before 2008. There are a significant number of people who came during the Biden administration legally under a parole program,
Right.
or under a refugee program, the one that was created for Afghanistan, the one that was created for Ukraine, the one that was created for Haitians, Venezuelans,
Yeah.
Cubans, and so forth, who early in the Trump administration then became out of status because they've cut off those programs, right? We have a lot of people who were here legally the last day of Joe Biden's term, who are here illegally now, not because they did anything, but because Trump and Christy Noem did
Right.
something. And
Right.
so, sorry.
I would say which JD Vance in the debate, in the vice president debate, called those people already illegal in the United States because of an administrative wand waving, is how he put that. But that's how immigration policy works. I never understood that, but that's how that works, right?
Yeah, and they waved a different magic wand to decide that every white South African qualifies as a refugee,
Right.
which would be laughable in any other context.
Right. Right. Do you think that ICE at this point is a rogue agency? I know that's a strong word, and I've asked other people this too. And it can be taken in a couple different ways, so you can tell me. Rogue against its own original mission, or rogue against the American people, or not at all? Do you think that's a step too far to say that?
No, I think it. I mean, I think it's gone rogue with respect to the Constitution.
Hmm.
The I know this is a lawyer's point, but this business about whether you need to go before a judge to get a warrant before you can knock down somebody's door and grab them out of bed. I mean, that's part of what the American Revolution was about. I think that's part of what the English Civil War was about. Obviously, this is something that's been honored sometimes more in the breach than in the observance. And we've had some lawless times, civil rights movement, Reconstruction. But fundamentally, the way the Fourth Amendment is understood is that the police stop at your door unless they have a warrant.
Hmm.
And so just deciding to give that the middle finger and to build your operations around the idea that you can print something out from Adobe Acrobat, write warrant at the top in big letters, and break down somebody's door, that's rogue against the Constitution. It's just lawless.
We're sort of at the halfway mark here, and I want to switch a little bit to how do we undo this? Because
Yeah.
at this point, we're going to have so many ICE agents, so many HSI agents, so many members of new employees of DHS that were brought up in this system in this way. Is there a way to pull this back? I mean, does it start with, unmasking agents and making stricter rules for these administrative warrants, which is what the Democrats are asking for right now, and this,
Yes.
back and forth government shutdown? But where do we start?
Well, I'll start with a little aside, which is you've mentioned a couple of times ERO is growing, ICE is growing, hiring a lot
Mhm.
of people. They are not only hiring 18-year-old Proud Boys off the street. I think that's what we're most worried about, is that they're going to hire people who have bad values, who have no training. They're going to get abbreviated training from ICE, and then they're going to go out and do a bad job of being officers. I think that's going to happen to some degree. I don't think that's the reason that Minneapolis is happening the way it is.
Mhm.
And in fact, a lot of what they're hiring are retirees, people who had already been in law enforcement, including federal law enforcement, and have retired. Maybe they retired in their early 50s and now in their late 50s, they can keep getting their pension and also get a salary,
Right.
rehired annuitants. And they're hiring people out of state and local law enforcement.
Yeah.
And I'm not so worried that those people are all going to be bad eggs. There are going to be some good eggs who actually I think might have some positive influence. If you can get somebody who was a sergeant in a real police department coming into ICE at age 58, they're actually going to be a good influence.
Hmm.
But more broadly, the agency is going to be too big. It's going to have misunderstood its mission and the way of doing it in this way. I think my approach to how you reform ICE in particular is to say, what are the functions that need to be done and who needs to do them? I think the function of interior immigration enforcement needs to be done. I know there are people further to my left who don't, who think it's just a BS thing to do. I don't
Sure.
agree with that. But I think ICE has proven itself incapable of running a detention system. We already have something called the Bureau of Prisons that runs a federal prison system. And we already have something called the U.S. Marshal Service in DOJ that detains people pretrial in federal jails, some of which, and state jails. And so I think the first thing I would do is I would take all those detention functions, put those in an independent agency. A friend of mine calls it the Office of the Federal Detention Trustee,
Sure.
and you run that just as an apolitical detention agency. You need a removal function. Well, why is the removal function of ICE separate from the way that CBP drives people back across the border, right? Let's have a removals office that works separately from the arrest and the prosecution and the detention. And then it can, again, sort of apolitically take what's available of people who are deportable and do the diplomatic work of putting people on flights. Does that sit at CBP? Does that sit at DHS? Does that sit at the Department of State? Because
Hmm.
it's fundamentally a diplomatic function. And then you have the third part, which is the enforcement, which is the going out and arresting people. And I don't think there's any question that the ICE brand is just unsalvageable. You don't want to put new lipstick on the same pig, but you have to take that enforcement function, having taken away the detention function, having taken away the removal function. That enforcement function is going to have to go somewhere, but why have it be done by people who only do that, right? Merge that in with DEA or merge DEA and ATF and ICE enforcement together and have people who are real law enforcement officers who are having to enforce lots of meaningful laws have the authority to do that too and professionalize it in that way. That would be my suggestion. But not to think that the errors in the way that it's being done institutionally means we can get rid of the function. I don't think we can.
I mean, that kind of sounded like a lawyer's longer-winded version of abolish ICE. Is that kind of what you're saying here?
Well, again, I think you abolish. The problem is what you want to do is abolish the institution, and all the arguments against it are arguments against abolishing the function.
Right.
So that's the point I'm trying to make. The institution is cancer and needs to be burned to the ground, but somebody needs to do the job.
Right.
And what they're going to have to do in the next administration, if we ever survive this, is the scene at the beginning of Raiders of the Lost Ark, where there's the idol on the weighted platform, and Indiana Jones has the bag of sand, right? And he's got to move it right over so that the platform doesn't feel the different weight. We are going to need to somehow hot swap in a better way of doing immigration enforcement while we get rid of ICE because it is just unsalvageable as an institution.
That's a lot of money to move around. That hot swapping, removing that golden idol, that's a lot of money to shift around. And that seems like a really heavy lift for any administration or any makeup of any Congress, certainly this one. You've been in those rooms and how those conversations happen. Is that even realistic?
ICE's budget before this year was about $9 billion a year. And that,
Yeah,
again, is half to do HSI stuff. It's not a third to do HSI stuff. It's not even what you
sure.
think of when you think of ICE. So if we're talking about $5-6 billion a year, that's not that much money in federal terms. Now you take another $150 billion like they brought in the Big Beautiful Bill Act. Now it's an enormous and obviously corrupting amount of money. But I think you have to take the step. You have to get that corrupting influence out. And
Mm.
look, I'm as hopeless about Congress as anybody, but we literally don't have any other answers.
Yeah. I think it's hard to, once you've given people money, to then take that money back. I think that's a hard sell for a lot of members of Congress. I think it's politically, I think that's a difficult thing for a lot of members of Congress to do on both
Well,
sides of the aisle.
they've painted themselves into a stupid corner because the money from the OBBBA to hire all these new, Proud Boys and put them, I was going to say ICE uniforms, but they don't have uniforms, but hire all these
Yeah.
18-year-olds and send them to Cabela's to figure out their own vigilante outfit. That doesn't continue to apply in the out years. That's
Right.
3-year money. So suppose you staff ICE up from 21,000 to 40,000 people. Are you going to just keep paying for those people indefinitely? After the Cold War, we had what was the BCRA, the Base Closure and Realignment Act,
Hmm.
that set up an independent blue ribbon commission because we had like four times as many military bases as we needed. They had to be combined. I don't care if you send it to a blue ribbon commission or what, but if you don't want to keep paying forever for this mistake, you're going to have some way to downsize it. You have to fire people, give them jobs that need to be done, but unless you want to be stuck paying, I don't know what's the budget going to have to be 20, 25, 30 billion dollars a year for ICE, like
Right.
you have to scale back.
You mentioned the uniform thing, and that was the thing that I was going to ask about earlier when we kind of got rolling. I What do you make of the fact that ICE agents don't wear a uniform? I mean, the idea that they're on the ground as a force that is supposed to be a unified force, but they're all allowed to sort of cosplay in their own, you know, uh, Sicario gear and drive around in unmarked, F-150s and minivans. It strikes me as a thing that only serves to ramp up panic and chaos instead of them actually doing the job of enforcing, even if they want to be as extreme in their enforcement as they have been.
I was reading a story yesterday that the Minnesota police had to warn ICE because there was a video that in the secure parking area of an ICE
Mhm.
facility, they had a stack of license plates and they were just swapping out the license plates on different ICE vehicles willy nilly. And Minnesota had to say, actually, you could only use the license plate for the vehicle that it's registered to. You
Yeah,
can't just put on an in-state plate of a vehicle that's registered in Virginia or whatever. Yeah, they have to settle back into being a mainstream law enforcement agency. I mean, on the specific issue of having uniforms, it is not clear to me why it has grown up that way. My guess would be that it goes back to when ERO was DRO, detention and removal operations
mm,
within INS, and for whatever reason, Border Patrol had uniforms and they didn't. But I think at this point, a basic uniform would be a really like significant step in just the most basic professional. There's this interesting social science literature, right, about like you put somebody in a white coat and they're
yeah.
more confident about making decisions, and you put somebody in a suit tie and their posture improves, or whatever. And so, yeah, I mean, the fact that you get to go to Cabela's and dress up like you're getting vengeance on your ex-wife, like, cannot be putting people in the right mindset, right?
I was thinking too that when we talk about ICE as law enforcement, when we talk about the way that they're operating, which seems to be an anti-law enforcement kind of a thing in a way, they're not operating within the law in a lot of these cases, and they sort of get a gleeful amount of or they get a sense of glee out of doing that, and that goes all the way up to the White House. How do you root that kind of thing out from the rank and file and from the people who are going to remain in these positions within DHS and within ICE? That people like you when you were there.
Honestly, I think that's why you have to get rid of it institutionally. You need different people
Mm,
doing this job. The people who are doing that job right now cannot keep doing law enforcement series jobs. If I could wave a magic wand January 20th of 2029, I would say everybody who had a badge at ICE at 9 in the morning, like cannot be a federal law enforcement officer anymore because it's just too. And obviously, they're going to have been good people, but it's just not manageable to salvage in that way. I don't know really what else to say. It is a cultural problem. The culture at ICE has been bad for a very long time, and
mm,
somewhat understandably. They felt like they were being set up to fail because they were. There were, go back 10, 15 years, about 10, 11, 12 million undocumented people. ICE had 10,000 people to do removals. It was resourced to do maybe 200,000 removals a year. And at 200,000 a year, you were never going to get through 12 million. And of course, it's not as though it was a static group of people either. Obviously, people become in status, people die, people leave the country. There's lots of churn. But if those are the numbers, you're never going to get there. And so ICE felt like it was just set up to fail. that it was the put upon younger brother of, or little brother of CBP, that had cool helicopters and had many more people and staffed the department more and got more attention. And you know what? ICE did get cut out of a lot of conversations, just sort of should have had a part in. And the third sort of plank of really bad ICE culture is, for whatever reason, ICE is the brand everybody knows. And so when Border Patrol pulls up, CBP pulls up and shoots Alex Preddy in the back, everybody says it's an ICE shooting.
Right.
And you don't care, and your audience doesn't care, but the people at ICE really care.
Yeah.
That they are always getting I don't know what your language rules are. They are always getting that the crud always rolls downhill to them.
Yeah.
And some of that is just like literally true, that if CBP makes a bad arrest and somebody ends up in ICE detention, then ICE is the one who has to fix it. So ICE is cleaning up CBP's messes constantly. ICE is answering media and congressional inquiries about cases that it didn't choose, that CBP did something wrong with or DOJ did something wrong. It's absolutely right that has been a sort of institutional piece of unfairness, but it bred a culture of put uponness that I think we're now seeing come out in the kind of working out of the ICE persona, in the masks, in the excessive force, and it's really bad.
An interesting parallel in that so much of MAGA politics is grievance politics, and that ICE, as a law enforcement agency within DHS, has, I guess, internally, as you're describing it, become a grievance agency, or it's so filled with that kind of a thing. That strikes me as interesting, that then this is the one that this guy, that Trump picks to be.
I mean, I kind of want to say it's almost like, it's not like it's full of people with grievances, but rather people who go there learn that the culture is a little bit of like it's just like a little bit of a Larry David persona of just like everything sucks for us.
Yeah.
No matter how good you have it. And so I just think that's some of what you're having play out. And look, I have a Larry David persona. I get it. But like, if you go back to Obama, there was a lawsuit. So the ERO used to have a union, and it got decertified during the Biden administration, partly because the rest of the labor movement was so sick of them. But ICE officers filed a lawsuit against the Obama administration, the theory of which was that it was illegal for anyone to tell an individual officer what to do. Mm-hmm. Like literally that they could not be managed, that it was illegal for a supervisor to say, you should arrest criminal A and not grandmother B. And that is crazy, but it's like an expression of the same ethos that we're seeing come out now.
Well, Scott, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
This is a great conversation. Thanks for having me.
I want to thank Scott again for coming on the show. You can find links to his website in the show notes for this episode. And that is it for today's episode. Please rate and review the show wherever you get your podcasts. Sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack, where you can get a brand new exclusive article for free today. And as always, share the show on social media. It's Mims News Pod, MIMS News Pod, all one word, on every platform. I am at Grant Herms on Twitter and Blue Sky, and at Grant_Herms on everything else. Thank you so much for listening today, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.